Today at Lorenzo's Fast Flow. Lorenzo answers your questions about dynoing a 1970 LS6 Chevelle engine. Is the intake and carb stock? Headers?
The intake manifold is stock. It's the intake manifold that came on the car. He was late with sending me the carburetor, so we put on a 750 carburetor. That's the CFM that belongs on the engine. I dyno lots of these motors with the factory carburetor. The horsepower and the torque figures are identical. I use headers on the dynamometer when I'm doing these motors because it's all rigged up with my exhaust parameters and my O2 sensors, and I have to make sure that all the cylinders are firing correctly and that the air-fuel ratios are correct for power numbers. The engine would make that same exact power if I had the factory carburetor.
What would it make through the stock exhaust manifolds and the 2.5-inch exhaust system?
Usually I see the power levels drop about 15 to 20 horsepower when I put the exhaust manifolds on. The reason why it doesn't drop very much is because the cams aren't very big, so overlap isn't as important. You're not turning them that high. It's making peak power around 6,000 RPM. When you have motors that are running up around 7,000, 7,500 and higher, the headers make a really big difference in those applications.
Did you run it with full accessories as well?
No, we did not run it with full accessories, and the horsepower numbers are close for one that isn't blueprinted. But when I take these motors and I cut the block and cut the cylinder heads to the CC spec to blueprint them, the power numbers go up like 40 horsepower. That's why the engines that they ran, in stock class, the cars were, much faster than cars that came out of the factory because we would do the engines to a blueprint spec. If you do them to a blueprint spec, the factory numbers aren't even close. It was way underrated. That's why some engines ran better than others out of the factory, because some engines were closer to blueprint spec out of the factory.
What casting number are the heads and chamber size?
The cylinder heads are 291s, they're factory 70 LS6 heads. The chamber size on those, they were 111 cc's, so they were much bigger than the blueprint spec. That's why the compression was down, and the deck height was 26 thousandths.
Yes, the big headers helped, but with over 1 point compression less than stock, this motor isn't quite stock.
The motor is completely stock, and the big headers don't really help it very much. People see big headers and they think it really helps with the power, but actually the headers are big for what we're working on there. They're just my big block dyno headers that I use to make sure everything is okay and the temperatures are okay. A smaller tube headers would cause a little bit broader torque curve. That's how much power the engine's made. If you look at stockers back in the day, how fast they ran after they were blueprinted, you'll see the horsepower numbers were more like 540, 550 horse after you blueprint them.
Once you add the factory air cleaner, water pump, steering pump, alternator, and especially factory mechanical cooling fan, that 519 horsepower is going to drop.
It drops a little bit, but again, that's not what I was concerned with. What I'm concerned with is making sure that the tune is correct on the engine, that it's going to be correctly tuned and there's no oil leaks and everything is working properly. That's why it's being dynoed. I wasn't dynoing it to show what a factory stock LS6 with all components on it was going to make.